Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So first, let me share my slides here. So can you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to present here my job market paper on the cultural assimilation of individualism and preferences for distribution. And just briefly about myself, I'm a PhD student at Uppsala University in my final year, so currently on the job market. And I work on different topics related particularly to inequality, migration, and culture. So the motivation for this study here is, as you're probably all aware, we have a quite large variation in levels of both inequality and also redistribution across the world. So also there seems to be the case that people in different cultures, in different countries around the world, have different preferences for equality and redistribution. So there's a new study here by Ingvild Almås and co-authors who've done a large survey around the world where they've also done experiments. And what they found here is that, so even in the same experimental settings, the preferences for both equality and redistribution seems to differ between different countries. So a sort of natural question to ask then is what explains these differences? And of course there are many things that explains how we view inequality and redistribution, but there are a couple of quite recent papers that have argued that culture seems to be an important aspect here. But most of these papers have primarily stated that culture matters. But what I will do in this paper is to look more on what kind of culture matters. So what I will do is to focus on one particular cultural dimension, which is the one of individualism versus collectivism. And I will soon come back to what's meant by this, but you can think of this as individualistic societies being more of an I society, while more collectivistic societies will focus more on some kind of group, so more in terms of a we society. And then you have all the countries or cultures in the world are somewhere in between these two extreme cases of pure individualism and pure collectivism. And another just motivation here is the new paper by Samuel Bassi and co-authors that some of you might have seen, which have found that historically in the US, it seems to be the case that frontier expansion created something called rugged individualism. So this would be a combination of individualistic culture and opposition to redistribution. So the question here in my study is if this combination of individualism and opposition to redistribution seems to be a more general case. So if this is something that goes hand in hand in general. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first study to actually look on this relationship between individualism and preferences for distribution in a large global sample of countries and individuals. And the second part of the paper then will look on a cultural assimilation or cultural convergence. So if we have this relationship here, what happens when people move into new culture? So looking on migrants, I will analyze whether their preferences for distribution will be determined by the culture in the country of origin or in the country of destination. And over time, will there be a convergence with the new culture? And if so, how fast will this happen? And will there be a cutoff depending on the age that you had when you migrated? So this is also related to sort of a discussion of vertical versus horizontal cultural transmission. So whether these traits, so in this case, the individualism and preference for distribution, are shaped by, if it comes mainly from your parents or from the surrounding, the cultural environment that you live in. And of course, both of these things will matter, but I will try to see which dominates and how will this change over time. Yes. There are two questions here in this paper. So the first one is basically, what is the relationship between cultural individualism on the cultural level and people's preferences for distribution on the individual level? And then the second part will be on what is the speed of cultural assimilation in this dimension that we observe when people migrate into a new culture. And so just briefly here, so this is an mainly empirical paper. So I will analyze this using the so-called epidemiological approach, which means that I will use a sample of migrants, and they will live in all countries all over the world, and they will come from all kinds of countries in the world. And then I will see whether the cultural origin affects their preferences for distribution today when they've moved into new culture. So the idea here is to use the variation in cultural origin, comparing migrants that come from different origins but live in the same country. But I will come back to this soon. And to analyze this, I will use individual level data from large international surveys, such as the World Value Survey and similar European surveys. And in total, these surveys includes almost 1 million individuals, but most of my analysis here will focus on the sample of migrants, and this will be a sample of roughly 60,000 migrants. And the second part, then, the cultural assimilation analysis, will use a similar approach. For here I will also compare the impact both of your country of origin and your country of residence, or country of destination. And then I will do heterogeneity analysis, where I will compare the estimates here for different samples that depends on how long you lived in your new country and also the age that you had when you migrated. And then I have a number of robustness checks that I will come back to soon. So just briefly here, a summary of the results. So to my awareness, this is the first large-scale analysis of this relationship between individualism and preferences for distribution. And what I find is a significant and seems to be quite robust negative relationship. So this means that people that come from more individualistic cultures or individualistic countries will have lower preferences for distribution. So there's a relationship here between individualism and opposition to redistribution. And when it comes to the second part here, this is also the first analysis of cultural assimilation in this dimension. And what my results suggest here is that there seems to be quite fast cultural assimilation, in the sense that it will happen during the first generation of immigrants. So I find no significant impact on second generation immigrants. And I also find that roughly when you lived as long in your new country as you did in your country of origin, the culture in your new country will start to dominate that of your country of origin in this dimension. And also I find no significant impact of your cultural origin if you were younger than 10 when you migrated. Yes. This will be the outline of my talk here today. So first, I'm briefly gonna go through some literature and a number of hypotheses here for this this question. And then I will go through the empirical approach and the data that I use, and then I will present my main results, both in terms of this relationship and also the cultural assimilation analysis. And if I have time at the end, I will show you some robustness results before I conclude. Right, so individualism versus collectivism is something that has been studied for quite long in cultural psychology, where it's been argued to be the main dimension of cultural variation between countries. But it's only more recently that there's been an increasing interest in economics to also look on this dimension here. But what we mean here by individualism versus collectivism is you should think of this as two ends on a scale where all cultures or countries are placed somewhere in between. And in the more individualistic societies, people will focus more on themselves and their self-fulfillment and so on, while in more collectivistic societies, people will identify themselves with some kind of group. And then you might discuss the size of this group. It will be bigger than just a nuclear family, and it will be smaller than the whole state. So there will be some kind of groups in sizes between these two. And so in most empirical work, the measure of individualism is the so-called Hofstede index. And I will come back to exactly how this is defined. But there's been a number of studies that have also confirmed that this correlates quite well with other measures. But what previous studies have found is that countries that are more individualistic also seems to have, on average, higher growth and higher levels of development and everything that comes are correlated with development. So at the same time, there's also intuitively there's this concept of individualism versus collectivism seems to be related to inequality, although it's not per definition the same thing. It seems likely that these are related, and this is also what's been found in this study on rugged individualism, that in the case of the US there is this relationship between individualism and opposition to redistribution, but I will test this in a broader sample here. So what you see on this map is then the main measure of individualism, so the Hofstede index, and here this is measured on, so just as a one-time measure for each country. So what you see is that blue color here means being more individualistic, and red colors mean being more collectivistic. So darker blue means a higher score on this scale, so very individualistic. So here you have the US, for example, and also most of Western Europe. And then you have a darker red here means a lower score, being more collectivistic, and you have cases like China and parts of South America and so on. So here you also see this relationship with economic development. And when it comes to preferences for distribution here, so in this study I will use direct survey questions to measure this. So this, you could also think of this as attitudes to redistribution or support for distribution. So there will be questions like, to what extent do you think that income should be made more equal, or that we need larger income differences? And if you think that the government should reduce income differences and so on. but then also, so what I will show you first is the pure correlation, but then there are, of course, many other studies that have also found that things both on the individual level and the country level also seems to affect how much redistribution and inequality people demand or prefer. Why should we expect there to be a relationship between individualism and preferences for distribution? So for some people, this might seem like being almost the same thing. I will show you that it's not when I come back to the measurement here, but still there could be a number of different reasons for why they are related. So first of all, we have this income effect. So we know that at least on a country level, more individualistic countries have higher GDP per capita. So it might also be the case that more individualistic people are higher up in the income distribution and might prefer less redistribution for sort of individual motives. But another link could also be this rugged individualism. So the case that more individualistic people are more opposed to government intervention in general, maybe not redistribution per se, but everything that the government does, and this might also include being opposed to redistribution. Then there are also a couple of theoretical works that have argued that there might be some historicals, more what I've called cultural reasons for why there might be a relationship here. So this could be the case that collectivists think that income is something bad, while more individualistic people might think that inequality might actually be something good, working as an incentive, for example. So what I will do empirically here is I will first look on the pure correlation, but then I will also try to control for these first for the income effect and also for the political effect here to see if we still have a relationship here. So my hypothesis here is that there is a negative relationship between individualism and preferences for distribution. But you might also come up with other examples. Sweden, for example, might be an example where which is quite individualistic, but also have quite high preferences for distribution, where it might work as a substitute for the family. But so this will be more about so Sweden is individualistic on according to the definition that I use here, while you might think of it as collectivistic on a state level. But in the end, I think this is an empirical question, what the relationship looks like. So the approach here that I use is this epidemiological approach, which means that I use variation in variation in the countries of origin for people that lives in the same country. So the data will use migrants that have migrated from all kind of countries to all kind of countries, but I will use country of residence fixed effects. So I can analyze whether the country of origin, the individualism in your country of origin affects your preference for distribution today, comparing two people that live in the same country but have different countries of origin. And the idea here is to using country of residence fixed effect to control for everything else that can affect your preferences for distribution in the country where you live. So my baseline estimation here will assume that preferences of an individual I that lives in country J and comes from another country C, this is measured in year T, is a function of the individualism score in your country of origin, a number of country of origin control variables, a number of individual level control variables, and then country of residence and year fixed effects. And for the assimilation analysis, then I will do the same thing, but instead of country of residence fixed effects, I will also include the measure of individualism in your country of residence, and then I will do heterogeneity analysis looking on different length of stay in the new country and different ages at migration. So I think what's nice with this approach is that I think reverse causality is probably quite unlikely that your preferences for distribution today will affect the culture in your country of origin. But I think you should still think of this as a relationship rather than a causal story. Of course, there might be different selection issues here. So migrants, on the one hand, might be different than the people that stays in the country. Also, there might be selection in terms of which countries you move to. So I do some analysis suggesting that this is not only a story about selection, although it might be a part of it. Also, there might be unobservables on the country of origin level. So when it comes to country of origin, I can only include control variables here. So I will try to control for many different things in your country of origin, but it could still be the case that I capture something else than this individualism only. So the data that I use here is data from the World Value Survey, the European Value Study, and the European Social Survey. So this in total includes more than 800,000 individuals that lives in more than 100 countries, and it covers a period going back to the 1980s. But most of my analysis here will focus on the migrants, and they are this information about who is a migrant and where did you come from is available for 46 countries, but they come from all over the world, and this data will be from the 2000s onwards. So the main measure here of preferences for distribution will be the questions of to what extent you think that income should be made more equal, or if we need larger income differences as incentives. And people answer this on a 10-point scale. And then I also have another question here in the European survey, which is to what extent you agree with the statement that the government should take measures to reduce income differences. And the measure of individualism, my main measure will be this Hofstede index. So this is based on, this is a survey based constructed by factor analysis. And in this measure, countries are giving a higher score, a more individualistic value if they value their personal life and to have an interesting work higher, while they're given a lower score, more collectivistic value if they are valued to be respected by family and friends and to have employment security higher. Later, I will also reconstruct this myself, but in the main analysis, I will use this measure as it's given. And then I will first do the correlation, and then I will control for other things on the individual level, such as your gender, age, income, and so on, and also different things on your country of origin level to see whether this drives the results or not. So this figure here shows you the raw correlation where you have on the x-axis. So this is for the full sample. So this is both migrants and non-migrants. And And on the x-axis, you have the individualism score in your country of residence. And then on the y-axis, you have the preferences for distribution. And both of these are scaled from 0 to 100. So what you see here is this negative relationship. So this is individual level data, but it's binned in this figure. But what you see is that so people that lives in more individualistic cultures have on average lower preferences for distribution. This figure here shows you the same correlation, but this is only for the migrant sample then. Is there a question?
Yes, there is a question. The question by Martin Fernandez Sanchez. So the question is about when is individualism measured in the sample?
Yes. So in this so in the Hofstadter index, it's only given as a it's argued to be persistent over time. So it's measured basically in the beginning of this period. I will in some other analysis, I will also construct this myself where I can use time variation, but in these figures, it's just given as a score, which you should think of as being representative for this period, but it's measured basically in the beginning of the period. Right. So here in this figure, you see for the migrant sample. So here you also see that people that come from more individualistic countries have on average lower preferences for distribution. And the scale here, if you compare a person from an extremely collectivistic culture with a person that comes from an extremely individualistic culture, the scale is somewhere around 10%. So you go down one point on this 10-point scale in your preferences for distribution. But this is just correlation, but it's what's also being confirmed then when I do this the regressions. So here you see the first column here is also using the full sample here. So it shows you that this relationship is not only observed among migrants, it's also for non-migrants. But here in the second and third column, I use the epidemiological approach, which means that I control for country of residence fixed effects to control for everything on the country of residence level. And then you also see this negative and significant relationship here between individualism and preferences for distribution. And in the third column, I try to control for more things on the country of origin level to see if this kills the results. So the level of trust in the country, even controlling for the mean preferences of redistribution in your country of origin. All of these things, the individualist index come out significant on top of these things. So there seems to be this negative and quite robust relationship. But what I do next then is to see, so when people migrate, do we see this convergence with the preferences in the new country over time? So this first figure here, here I have the coefficient estimates here on this relationship between individualism and preference for distribution. But here I've separated the sample into different definitions of having another country of origin. So here you see the people with that have another citizenship than the country they live in, or people that are born in another country than they live in. And here you have the second generation immigrants, if you like, so people whose mother or father are born in another country. And so what you see here is that these results are only significant for the first generation immigrants here. But what I will do next is to try to look only on the first generation migrants and to see if we see this convergence with time spent in the new country. So
you got about
yes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. So what you see in this figure here is the same estimates here, But here I've separated the sample into how large share of your life you lived in the new country. So on the left-hand figure here, you have the impact of the individualism score in your country of origin on your preference for distribution today, where you see that this is statistically significant when you lived a relatively short period of time. So less than 1/3 of your life has been spent in the new country. And then it's insignificant if you spend a relatively large share of your life, so more than 2/3 in your new country. And then it's marginally significant here in between. On the right-hand figure, you see the same thing, but instead the impact of how individualistic the culture in your new country of residence is. And there you see the exact opposite relationship. So for people who have lived a relatively short period of time, the culture in your country of residence is insignificant, and then it becomes significant the longer you lived in the country. And here, so this also suggests that this is not only about selection in this dimension here, since we do not see this impact or this significant relationship between country of destination and preferences for distribution for people who have just migrated. But this is share of life might depend both on the actual time spent in the country, but also how old you were when you migrated. So this figure here does the same thing, but instead I've separated the sample into the age that you had when you migrated. So here you see a similar pattern. I mean, it's not. It sort of suggests it's not. I think you cannot separate them from each other, but it seems at least to be the case that it's the culture in your country of origin is insignificant here when if you were somewhere younger than 10 when you migrated, and it seems to be significant if you were older than somewhere around 10. And then you see the impact of the culture in your new country is significant for the whole all kind of ages here, but it's probably stronger the younger you were when you immigrated. So just a brief summary of some other tests and analysis I do in the paper here. So first of all, so this Hofstede index is just given as a score on each country and independent of time. So what I also do is I use this survey data that I have to reconstruct the Hofstede index on the individual level and to see whether we find the same relationships, which we actually seem to do. I've also done some assimilation analysis using registered data in Sweden, more in the sense of general assimilation. So do you give your children more Swedish names over time? And so compared to this, we see that this dimension that I've studied here on preferences for distribution, the assimilation seems to be faster since it's no significant effect on second generation immigrants, which it seems to be using other measures of more general assimilation or cultural integration here. I've also done used an IV approach using a pronoun drop, which is the idea that in some languages you can allow for a pronoun drop, which means that you do not need to say I speak. In Spanish, you can only say hablo, for example. You can drop the first pronoun. So the idea is that these countries would be more collectivistic. So basically using this as an IV, or you should probably think of this as an alternative measure. The results are also confirmed using that measure. And yeah, so just before I finish here, I can show you. So this is just reconstructing the Hofstadter index, but using the survey question, so I get a measure on the individual level. And this figure here shows you the correlation between this country level Hofstadter index and the average measure of individualism on using the individual level measure here. So there seems to be a quite strong correlation here between these, reconstructing this measure on the individual level. And this figure here shows you the correlation then on the individual level. So reconstructing this Hofstadter index of individualism, but on the individual level, you have this really strong and negative relationship here between individualism measured on the individual level and preferences for distribution. And just summarizing some of the other robustness checks here, I find that these are the results are robust, looking on both of these two questions that I mentioned earlier. So the one on whether you think that incomes should be made more equal in general, or if you think that the government should reduce income differences. Also, if I look on separately on sample of migrants that have moved to relatively more individualistic or relatively more collectivistic countries. And if I look both on people who have migrated between different regions or within a region. And also, finally, so there's a new survey in Sweden which have surveyed a quite large sample focusing only on migrants. And in that survey, they have some questions more directly related to collectivism and versus freedom and so on. And there you find similar results, and also no significant impact of the individualist score in your country of origin if you migrated as a child here. So just to sum up here, there seems to be this negative and quite robust relationship between cultural individualism and preferences for distribution. Cultural assimilation in this dimension seems to be quite fast, in the sense that it happens within the first generation of immigrants, and I find no significant impact of your cultural origin if you were younger than 10. So in this dimension, horizontal cultural transmission seems to be stronger than vertical. Yeah, and then I have different things that I'm working on currently. So further heterogeneity analysis, trying also to look on to what extent this depends on the cultural distance between the country your country of origin and the country of destination, and so on. But I think I stop here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Olle. So I have first a question from Martin Fernandez Sanchez. So let me give you the floor, Martin. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, Olle. Thank you so much. This is really interesting. Let me just ask you a bit about the measure of individualism, because there is other work, right, showing that migrants self-select, right, in terms of their individualism. So to the extent that you have a big diaspora abroad, that's gonna affect your measure of individualism back home. So I wanted to ask you precisely whether you know how selected these migrants are, so whether you know their level of individualism and whether you can compare the level of individualism of these migrants to their respective origins. Selection increases as the size of migration of people living abroad is higher.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So no, I think this is really it's a great question and very relevant one. So I think I haven't done this, so I don't have the answer to your question because I just quite recently constructed this measure of individualism on the individual level. But I think since I now have this measure, I could do exactly what you suggest. So to compare this with the average in your country of origin and to see these how selected the sample is and so on. So I think it's a great suggestion. It's something I should do, but I do not have an answer to it as of now, unfortunately. Thanks.
All right, then I have a question from Yuki Takashi. Let me allow you to talk. That should be fine now.
Hey, Olle. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have a question. So, how many do you have any? So, are migrants concentrated in? So, how many migrants are there in each destination country? So, are they concentrated in Europe or there are some in Asia? Because I think in Europe is mostly individualistic. So I'm not sure if what you're capturing is from moving from collective to individualistic countries, or you're also measuring moving from individualistic to collective countries. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. So yeah, maybe I wasn't. I should have been clear on this. So there is variation here. So in the World Value Survey, you have people in all countries in the world, so including East Asia. But this question of your country of origin and the availability of information on migrants is much larger in these European surveys. So there is quite large overrepresentation of people that lives in Europe here. So you're right that the largest part of the sample will be people that have migrated into Europe, so into relatively more individualistic cultures. So I've done this analysis of people that also move to more collectivistic societies, but and there you see similar results, but it's a much smaller sample. So yeah, I don't know. So if you have any suggestions on maybe if there are surveys that are conducted, particularly in East Asia or other parts where you also have this information, I would love to know that, because there is overrepresentation of people that have migrated to Europe here.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right, then I have questions from Etienne Bachir. Etienne, can you?
Hi.
Perfect.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have two remarks and questions. The first one is about the instrumental variable, like the pronoun drop. I have some doubts about it because you said that in Spain there is no pronoun, but in France, which is just next to Spain, there is one, and I think I remember that on your map, the two countries have about the same value for individualism. So I have some doubts about this method. And I have a question about if there is a selection among those who answered, among the respondents, because you said that you had about 60,000 migrants in your data. But if I recall well, on your graphs, you had roughly 30,000 respondents. So do you think that, so it's like the half have not answered to these questions. So do you think there is a selection bias among those who answered?
Great, thanks a lot. So for the pronoun drop, I agree that it's you might discuss this measure. So the reason for using is it's been used in other studies before as sort of an instrument for culture in general. What I do think is that this seems to be relate quite so the hypothesis here is quite strongly related to this idea of individualism versus collectivism, and yeah, so I think actually France is a bit more individualistic than Spain. Maybe it was not visible in the map, but so I didn't show you the IV results here, but so you find these first stage results that actually cultures that have this pronoun drop are more collectivistic on average. But I mean, it's yeah, no, I used it as a robustness check. I mean, you might discuss the validity of this instrument, of course. When it comes to the selection bias, so yes, I should probably do more to analyze this. So the main reason for why you have this drop in the number of respondents compared to the number of migrants in the full sample and the ones I showed you in the figures are that in these figures I use this Hofstede index, which it's not available for all countries in the world. So I think that explains the main reason for this drop. But of course, there's also this drop due to people not answering the question on preferences for distribution. So yeah, it's a great point. I should try to analyze if this is something that drives the results. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Then I have a question from Adam Levi. Adam, you should be able to unmute normally.
Yes, hello. Hi, thanks for the presentation. So I was having similar thoughts as at the end, the previous question regarding the IV. And so, yeah, I was also just wondering why were you not, so I mean, if the IV is good, I mean, you didn't show the results here, the F-stats and discussion, the exclusion and so on, but if the IV method is good enough, then I was wondering why you don't include it in the main table or put it as the next column next to your IV stuff that you have there, and why are you just using them then as a robustness check? So yeah, just a clarification question there.
Yeah, thanks. So I mean, my main reason is, so I think that the main issue here is for these results are probably more about selection, which will not be solved by this IV. I'm also not personally extremely convinced about the exclusion restriction here. So, I mean, it's hard to say whether it's really the case that that the effect of this language characteristic should only affect preferences for distribution through the individualist versus collectivist dimension. Yeah, I think so. That's my main reason. Yeah.
All right. Then I don't see other hands raised, so I think we've answered all the questions. We are perfectly on time.